welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be diving into the latest patch for set 6, 11.24. After a long 3 weeks of Katarinas and other reroll compositions, we finally arrived at the final patch of 2021. Keep in mind this patch will be slightly longer than previous, as December generally has a longer patch cycle due to the holidays. We'll be covering what's most relevant, but we highly recommend reading the full patch notes. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To begin with, there's quite a few augment changes to cover before we get into the champion and trait balance adjustments. First off, they're adjusting the trait augments to be more appealing than before. This change makes it so each tier of trait augments will provide something a bit extra. Overall, this is a necessary change because those augments were rarely ever worth it except in specific situations. Be sure to read through the patch notes to see what each trait augment will now provide. With that, we can now switch over to the balance adjustments being introduced this patch, beginning with Broken Stopwatch. This is a relatively niche augment, particularly because it was originally a prismatic option, meaning it was often up against some really good augments. They've dropped it down one tier and lowered the duration to 1 second. Now it'll be far more competitive with other augments in the gold tier, though it does heavily depend on how viable Jin is in the meta, since this augment is the most beneficial to him. Socialite on its own is quite good, but the augments for it are often situational at best, so they are buffing Duet to now provide a bonus 500 health to the champion on the hexes. While it's a good change, it's still a risk to take Duet since the hexes may not be in a great position. Featherweights has been a bit too good, particularly early game, as it's often used to win streak, so they're now taking it down a bit to 30, 40, 60% additional attack speed and move speed. This augment should still be strong, but not always guarantee a win streak after the changes. Possibly the largest augment change is to March of Progress. March has quietly been one of the strongest early augments to get. This change leans into that by making March only available on 1.4, but they've also bumped it up to Prismatic, meaning it has real competition in the tier of augments. Being Prismatic will now provide 5 experience per round instead of just 4. Still strong, but maybe not the default pickup every time, considering there's a lot of strong Prismatic augments. Spellblade received a rework, making it so Arcanas deal bonus damage equal to 200% of their ability power after casting an ability. This makes the augment more in line with the bursty nature of augments, though it's likely to remain niche. Windfall, unsurprisingly, is being nerfed early on since it's a large injection of gold. Now it'll only provide 15 gold as the first augment, though they did buff it when it's the third augment to 35 gold. Good change, though 15 gold in the early game is still likely to always be the best option. Portable Forge once again is getting a round of adjustments to several of the artifact items. Mostly all of the changes are buffs with the exception of Collector, since the artifact was already the strongest. Be sure to read the patch notes to see all of the buffs because there's quite a few of them. The final augment change we'll cover for today is to Stand United, an augment that struggles to be useful consistently. They've buffed the numbers to 3, 4, 5 additional AD and AP from 2, 3, 4. While this is a nice buff, the problem with Stand United is that to get real value from it, you need to have most of your composition figured out, meaning it's not an augment you want to pick before 4-6. That said, a buff to it is good, but it's likely to still remain niche. Alright, now we can talk about the trait changes for patch 11.24. Challenger's up first, and for anyone familiar with the meta, it should be no surprise to see that it's being nerfed to 30, 55, 80, 130% attack speed from 30, 60, 90, 145%. Honestly though, the nerf doesn't matter too much because the effect is doubled anyway on a takedown, but it is a good idea to nerf the trait. Chemtech is being reworked slightly as they want the effect to be a bit more impactful before the fight ends. So they've made the buff always last 8 seconds, added scaling to the attack speed buff, and evened out the health regeneration to be 4% at every tier. The big thing is making it last 8 seconds all the time, meaning 3 Chemtech is actually useful to run. Overall, good changes. Innovator has been far too strong in the mid to late game, meaning it's nerf time. The Bear Summon buff is going to 25 bonus ability power and attack damage, while the Dragon crit damage buff is down to 40% from 75%. Bear really didn't need a nerf, to be honest, as the real issue with late game Innovators is the Dragon. But much like with the Augments, nerfing high rolling Innovators to be less of a guaranteed top 2 is a good thing. After being nerfed out of the meta, Academy is back with the intent to be a bit more appealing at lower tiers. Bonus AD and AP for 4 Academy is now 40 from 35, and the scaling per cast is going to 3, 5, 10, 15 from 3, 5, 8, 12. Yone will likely be happy with this change, but we expect to see Katarina to be nerfed mostly out of the meta, so this Academy change isn't all that impactful. They are buffing 8 Arcanists a decent amount, though it likely doesn't matter much since there's quite a few nerfs to the Arcanist champions that we'll cover later on. Also, Arcanist at high tiers wasn't doing poorly as a synergy, it was mainly performing well due to the champions. And the final trait change is to Syndicate. Syndicate hasn't been all that impactful throughout set 6 so far, though it hasn't been completely absent from the meta. To help it be more consistent, they are buffing the bonus armor and magic resist to 60 from 50. Since that's a decent buff, they're going to lower the 7 Syndicate bonus down to 33% from 50%. Despite being a partial nerf, these changes should make certain champions more consistent, such as Shaco. Time now for champion changes. Up first is a nerf to Garen, as they've lowered his ability's damage to 15% of his missing health from 20%. A necessary change since several low-cost champions dominated the previous meta, with 3-star Garen being one of the key aspects of the Protector Sniper reroll. Another frontliner 1-cost being nerfed is Darius, with his mana going to 50-100 from 50-95, and the healing from his ability down to 120-140-160 from 125-150-175. Darius 3 wasn't exactly common, but with the Syndicate buff and nerfs across the board to low-cost champions, it makes sense for Darius to get the axe. Last 1-cost change is to Kassadin, with his Mana Reave effect going to 50% across all tiers. This does buff Kassadin 1, but overall, this is a good idea to make the Mana Reave effect cap at 50%, because higher than that feels really not fun to play against. Another reroll champion taking a hit is Cogmod, though it's less of a nerf and more of an adjustment. They've changed his damage to 7, 8, 9% of the target's max health from 6, 7, 10%. Basically, Cogmod 3 is a bit weaker, but earlier on, he'll be slightly stronger. This is really the best way to address low-cost champions because they should be viable as early carries, but not main carries later on. The Trolls are likely to go to war over the nerf to Trundle, as they've lowered his attack damage steal to 20, 25, 40% from 20, 30, 50%, and the attack speed slow to 25% from 50%. While the Trolls may be unhappy with these nerfs, they were necessary to bring Trundle in line with being a 2-cost champion. And the champion everyone was looking forward to being nerfed is Katarina. They haven't nerfed her that much, as her damage is going to 160, 200, 250 from 180, 225, 300. There's a few other changes that do affect Katarina, but number-wise, she's not in a bad spot, but hopefully no longer the best carry in the game when 3-starred. Vex was the talk of the town last patch, and oh boy, they gutted her in this patch. The stacking shield bonus is down to 10% from 25%, the shield amount to 500, 600, 750 from 550, 700, 900, and the damage down to 100, 145, 175 from 125, 200, 275. Nerfs across the board, and quite substantial ones at that. Vex may not be completely unplayable, but no longer viable as a solo frontliner for several compositions anymore. With Katarina being nerfed, Assassins needed a bit of love, which means Shaco gets to step up. To accomplish this, they've buffed his health by 50 and lowered his mana to 40-80 from 50-90. Decent buffs along with Syndicate, which may help Shaco be a viable option. Lissandra has also been another 3-cost problem of the meta, so they've nerfed her ability damage, lowered the debuff to 30% from 40%, and the duration by 1 second. Definitely some heavy hits to Lissandra, though they did fix the bug that causes her ability to fizzle, and Chemtech 3 is stronger, so she'll likely end up in an okay spot. On to tier 4 with Yone taking a 5 attack damage hit. 5 attack damage can certainly be impactful, but unlikely to make that much of a difference for Yone, especially since Academy got a small buff. Expect to continue seeing Yone in the meta. Interestingly, they've buffed Fiora by 5 attack damage and her ability scaling to 170% from 160%. While she hasn't been a main carry, Fiora is perfectly fine as a secondary damage dealer, so buffing her feels a bit unnecessary. If anything, this just guarantees Challenger will remain viable in the meta. They're doing some odd adjustments to Jhin. By lowering his mana, it means he'll cast earlier and more often in a fight, but they've lowered his attack damage by 5 and scaling of his ability by 25% at tier 2. Meaning Jhin will hit less hard but pierce more often, so his backline access is slightly better but weaker into tanks. Hard to say how those changes will play out, but may leave Jhin slightly better than before. Arcanists continue to get hit by the nerf bat, with Lux's mana refund going from 30 to 20. coupled with the Vex nerf, Arcanist may not be a viable option in the upcoming meta. Orianna hasn't exactly been underutilized, but she can be a bit lacking if you try to make her the main carry. So they've lowered her mana cost a bit in addition to a slightly lowered stun. Less mana does help a lot and should help Orianna be more consistent. And the final 4 cost change is the Scion with his health going up by 100 and the stun duration of his ability going up by 0.5 seconds at tier 2. Good buffs considering they absolutely gutted Scion in the hotfix patch of 11.23. Scion frontline should be an option now, but don't expect him to do well as a carry like he was previously. To end with, 5 cost champions are getting quite a few adjustments. Akali is gaining 50 health with a minor damage buff to her ability at tier 1. Akali hasn't been underperforming but did lack consistency, especially at level 1, so these buffs should help with that. Similar to Scion, Galio is gaining 100 additional health. On top of that, his ability's damage is going up to 200-300 from 150-250, which should make him feel more impactful in fights. That said, his attack damage is going down by 30, but that doesn't matter too much since Galio should mainly be used as a tank. Another blow to Arcanists are nerfs to Victor. His mana is going up to 150 from 140, and his damage is going down to 325-425 from 350-400. Just another reason not to play Arcanists in 11.24. Finally, Jace. Jace, specifically melee Jace, can be way too good, especially with items. Because of that, they've lowered his bonus defensive stats to 30 from 40, and the shield in melee down to 350-500 from 400-600. Don't fret though, they've buffed range Jace with the attack damage gain going up to 45-70 from 35-60. Overall, these are definitely nerfs, but making backline Jace more of an option should still keep him relevant. The last section is item changes, which we'll keep brief since there's only a few. Blue buff is not getting the insane buff they teased a few weeks ago, but instead now grants an additional 20 starting mana. This won't help the majority of champions that used blue buff, but it does make the item playable on a wider range of champions. Definitely a good way to buff an item without making its normal usage overpowered. Frozen Heart, oddly enough, is being buffed to 35% attack speed slow from 25%. It's definitely scary to see this item buffed, but to play Devil's Advocate, there's not many Frozen Heart holders in set 6, so it may not be that scary of a buff. And lastly, we have a nerf to Ionic Spark. Even though they listed this under small changes, it's actually quite impactful because it further nerfs Katarina. A welcome change to be sure, though Ionic may fade back into obscurity if Katarina falls out of the meta. And that's all for today's video, folks. Again, we highly recommend reading the patch notes yourself with so many changes. In particular, read through the bug fixes because there are a lot that they've fixed this patch, including the very frustrating target swapping that units were doing in 11.23. Let us know in the comment section below which changes you're the happiest about. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.